Hello and welcome to Broadband. Here at Broadband, by the philosophy that one needs other human beings to teach them how to be human. Our guide for today on this journey of communal actualization is Chef Faisal Al Nashmi, the creative mind behind Street AlMakan, Table Otto, Pam and Cow, Street Cafe Kuwait, and San Restorante. Faisal has been instrumental in the evolution of Kuwait's dining scene, and he has successfully undertaken the challenge of not only questioning the culinary status quo, but pushing the local culinary boundaries. I want to set the stage for this interview by shining the spotlight on three main points of focus for our dialogue. The first being Faisal and his unique human journey. Next, I want to leverage Chef Faisal's insights to explore the nuances behind creating a menu, a restaurant, and an unshakable culinary identity. And finally, I want you, the listener, to be able to walk away from this conversation with some habits that a successful entrepreneur, chef, and leader like Faisal has developed to aid his success. Without further ado, hello, Faisal. How are you?
Fine, thank you, Aziz. Great to be on the show. Super excited.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And I want to start with a story that you've told many times before, but I want you to, bear with me and tell it one more time. You found your passion for the culinary arts in the most chaotic of ways. Share that momentous, life-altering event with our listeners.
Look, I've said the story like a million times, and I never get bored, honestly, explaining this. Because to me, I think with time, I realized the importance of faith, and I'm a true believer in faith. Because when my dad was appointed to the manager of KPC, Kuwait Petroleum Corporation, back in 2005, I had almost I think it was almost 1 year left before I graduated from high school. So, I had to make that crucial move of going with my family abroad to London. And the first period when I got there, I remember literally it was 2 weeks after I got there. My friend were walking through one of the streets, and we passed by a group of 6 dudes, and I still remember to this day, it was a super traumatic event that happened. They mugged us, they started beating us, 6 of them, and we were only 2. And I never had that experience before, being a young kid. I was around 15 or 14. And being in a situation like that, I was super traumatized after that. So for the next 2 years that I stayed in London, I never left home. Literally, I was really traumatized to a level where my only transit to school was through a car. I never took buses. I never took trains. I never walked. I was really paranoid. And in the 2 years that I spent, most of my day at home was always with my mom. And my mom loves cooking. And I've grown up in a household where we appreciate food, but I never got the love and passion of food through my mom. However, because my mom always watched TV on BBC Food, I was with her 24/7. And I still remember to this day was me cooking my first roast chicken. It was Jamie Oliver's recipe. I still have the picture, me holding the raw chicken before it went into the oven. And I believe from that point on, it really changed my perception on food and being in the kitchen. So every day I used to buy stuff that I've never experienced before. I used to buy duck, being a really amateur cook. Buying duck and experiencing the cooking techniques of how to cook duck. I burnt duck, of course. I burnt a lot of things in the kitchen, but that only made me understand the fundamentals of cooking and my love for food,
That's amazing. But, at the same time, I would say that there are many homemade chefs like Binging with Babish or Ahmed Zamid who stumbled upon their culinary success by experimenting around the kitchen and filming it. So how important is that Cordon Bleu experience to your success as a chef that is also running a business?
To me, there's a really fine line between wanting to become a chef because of social media or wanting to become a chef because of yourself. And a lot of people really sometimes mistakenly ask this question. They just don't know what the answer is, because most of the time it's option A, where I want to be famous on social media and I just want to show people that I'm in Cordon Bleu. And this is the true fact, unfortunately. However, I really see that you need to, first of all, identify who you want to be. Do you want to be an Instagram chef? If you do, fair enough. Just don't go to school, because you're going to waste your time. You're going to waste your energy. You're going to waste a lot of money going into a school where honestly, you're not going to get anything out of it. You're going to get a lot of techniques. You're going to get a lot of ideology, but going into school, it's like torture. It's like almost a year of torture. You're studying almost 8 to 10 hours a day. You're in the kitchen on your feet, and it's physical torture. And that's the beauty of it. So my answer is always the same. If you don't want to pursue your career, being in the kitchen 24/7, if you don't want to open a restaurant, if you don't want to be on top of your game, don't waste your time. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of money for yourself.
Beautiful and real words from a person who's a salty vet at this point. But describe opening day on your first restaurant, Street AlMakan, as a young, fresh-faced 24-year-old, was it everything you dreamed it would be, or were you faced with a harsh reality?
Definitely not. Definitely not. That's like that's a definite not. I mean, having a vision of how you want your restaurant is it shouldn't be compared to the first day. The first day, everything that's gonna go wrong will go wrong. Al Makan, the first day, I remember because a lot of people were anticipating us opening. We built a very long hype for almost more than a year. We've been building the hype of Al Makan because it came. This project came at a time where people were bored and they wanted change. They wanted immediate change, and they wanted big change. So when Al Makan came in, we built this great hype. I remember opening day, we had people lining out my door across the corner of the building. So I still remember me like being in the kitchen, like hyperventilating, just worried what might go wrong. And when I heard that people were waiting in line outside, my heart like literally dropped because I didn't expect what was going to happen. We launched, we opened, tickets started flying in. We got smashed the first day. Everything with that was going to go wrong went wrong. Food was wrong. Food was cold. Tickets were sent to the wrong tables. People left not paying. People never received their food. People waiting more than an hour. It was just a mess. It was a complete mess. And I remember leaving the restaurant. I stood outside. I smoking my cigarette, just being alone. I just didn't want anybody. And I still remember thinking to myself, after 4 years of building this restaurant, this is how I wanted the restaurant to be. And I really remember answering myself, I'm like, this is really not how I wanted restaurants to be. At that point, I was going to give up. I was going to back out because it was so much, drama, so much pressure, so much energy, so much adrenaline running through your body, So I just stopped my thinking. I'm like, I have to go back to home. I have to sleep. I have to think tomorrow morning. So that's what I did. I didn't speak to anybody. I went home. I took a nap, woke up next day. I'm like fresh as new. And that's how I've been every single day. Every single day. It's the same thing till date. I get a comment, I get a complaint, I get whatever, and I'm always down. Next day, next morning, it's always me being up again, going, being so excited going to work. And it's the same experience every single day till date.
It's that reset. You're able to reset your mind every single day and come in fresh every morning. That's phenomenal.
Definitely.
Okay, so the major players in the Kuwaiti culinary industry are well established, have a lot of resources and money, and whether or not we like it, they've defined the local food and restaurant culture for decades. It was kind of the Applebee's, Chili's kind of culture. And I'm certain that they took a sharp head turn at the arrival of a hungry 24-year-old to the scene. How were you received by your peers and counterparts in Kuwait?
Coming into the market, I believe we were a head turner because coming in at a very young age, 24, we're 4 partners, 3 other partners, everybody running a different aspect of the company. So we reached a level where the market was just going backwards instead of forwards. The palate just became more and more amateur, unfortunately. So we always asked this question, and I believe that was my side mainly. I was the chef. Going to a lot of restaurants. I used to be a food critic at a certain time because I just loved going to restaurants and just tasting different kinds of food, whether good or bad. And every time I came back to Kuwait, I dined out and I always had the same question. Like, why are all restaurants the same thing? Why can't we have any other variety? It's the same thing everywhere we go. And that's the reason why we came in. And we wanted to develop a concept where it was a personal representation of a character or an identity rather than having a concept built off consumers. Because practically that's what all restaurants were doing. If I know burgers will sell, I'm going to do a burger. If I know sushi will sell, I'm going to do sushi. Okay, so why don't I do like the burger sauce on a sushi? Okay, wow, that's a new dish, Unfortunately, that's the ideology of where we've reached. And all of a sudden, the market just turned into one mesh of a flavor profile, which we really wanted to get out of it. And that's what we did. We came in, we opened up the restaurant, and everybody started looking towards us. They're like, how the hell do people or kids this age open a restaurant this big? We're 300 square meters. We're covering around 70 people, and serving the food that we did. And so all the big eyes used to turn towards us. So all the big boys that I used to learn from used to pat our backs,
That's phenomenal. So you're saying that all these other groups, all these other restaurant groups and chefs and restaurateurs were supportive of what you were doing, and they came in and they kind of showed you appreciation, and they encouraged you. Is that what happened?
I know, look, it's both ways at the end of the day. Some are definitely there to support, some are there to learn, some are there to be influenced, to be inspired. But generally speaking, no matter what reason you're there, at the end of the day.
Exactly. So the food critic needs access to be powerful, and the chef restaurateur needs the critic to be successful. So who has more power in that equation? You mentioned talking about the self-proclaimed coffee connoisseur, but what about the food critic?
I've been fighting for this for the past 7 years, wanting to get real critics, because unfortunately in Kuwait we never had the real critics. The critics that we have are influencers, and that's where there's always a confusion towards it. Today, influencers are considered food critics to some extent. So now that's the level of where we've reached. There isn't anybody specified in going to restaurants, tasting food, and grading food. There are many, but most of them, their main sole purpose is to be famous on Instagram and later to charge restaurants to post about their accounts. So when you question the self, it's honestly chefs being chefs. The critics do not drive restaurants in Kuwait, or let's say the influencers do not drive restaurants. They are there as a tool for restaurants to make money. They're there as a tool to help promote, definitely. They're a great tool to help promote your items, to help promote your restaurant or your new joint on social media. However, they're not the right people that make judgments, because restaurants, I believe, are powerful enough to make their own, identity or theory towards the market.
So something that Kuwaitis do understand is the influencers that you're talking about, right? So influencers understand that people in general are visual creatures, and they are either going to beautify themselves or beautify their pictures to get more followers. So just like people shop with their eyes, they tend to eat with their eyes as well. What role does sexy and inviting plating play in your business?
100%. I mean, in Kuwait, I would say not only in Kuwait, maybe in the GCC, it's not really about sexy plating as much as it's about interactive plating. Our phone is our number one tool. Before we even touch the plate, our phones are out. We love to film stuff that is happening on the table, especially if it's interactive. And that's why if you would see the dishes that have been created over the past 7 years, today it's much more interactive than what I used to. That's why sauces are being poured on table. That's why sauces are poured on top of pancakes. Maybe on AlMakan, the jackpot fries, you receive it in a bag, and you have that experience opening up the bag. So it's more about interaction rather than plating. Plating definitely plays a big role. However, the interaction plays a much bigger role. So people are always looking for the next thing. I think maybe in the next year you would see a piñata being placed on the table, just waiting for people to bash it up.
There's gonna be a lot of waiters with concussions by the end of that.
But it's interesting because you would see a lot of creative dishes being developed in a certain way just to kind of have that experience. Sometimes a big percentage of the time is not really practical. It's just for the visual aspect. Like, for example, the viral cafe that went serving coffee in a baby's milk bottle. But again, you can't really answer why. There's no really specific reason why. Why are you serving an iced latte out of a milk bottle? There's no reason. It's just because it's interactive. So that's what people like.
Funny enough, that was such a notorious scene that I think they got shut down. So
yes, they got shut down.
Hey guys, this is the part of the podcast where people usually tell you to buy this product or subscribe to this service, but we don't have any sponsors yet. So we'll sell ourselves instead. We have 4 simple asks. 1, please subscribe if you haven't already. 2, share the podcast. Share it with your friends, share it with your family, and share it with a stranger. Start a conversation. 3, check out the show notes. You can find all the references that we've already made and are about to make on there. And 4, engage with us on Instagram and email. Enjoy the rest of the show. So you've been described as an artist, a creative, a storyteller. I can imagine that creating a menu is a fine balance between expressing yourself on the plate and propping up the bottom line to ensure a healthy cash flow. Do you see adding the chicken tender, burgers, and fries to the menu to meet the bottom line as a selling out on your artistic expression?
I think it's an important thing to consider, definitely. It's an equation that you have to create that puts you and your consumer in the same equation, and for you to have your answer, because it's something that we learned over the past years where we created an equation. I had to put myself, my consumer, what they like, what they dislike, and what I like and what I dislike, and finding an answer that pleases both ends, So yes, we did have to place a burger. Yes, we did have to place chicken tenders and all of that onto our menus. But that was only for the consumers to respect who we are and for me to respect my consumer. For the consumer to come in and to take that step towards your door, they would have to make sure that you are serving something that is safe to them. For them to see chicken tenders on a menu, or for them to see a Caesar salad on a menu, is always safe. Whatever way it's being plated or whatever way it's being presented, to them, this is a safe dish. And yes, I am very safe and I know that I'm going to eat this dish. And it's up to you as a creator and up to you as a chef, how you would want to develop this into your own likings. And that's always the equation that you have to draw. I learned this, by the way, years after we opened, because that was our answer to our survival. We were at one point, honestly, with AlMakan, we were at one point where we're on the verge of closing down the first year. And it was heart-wrenching to see a concept this strong and this well thought out to not make any income, because we stuck to our own identity and or our own visions. And that's when we had to realize that we're doing it on our likings. However, what about the people? At the end of the day, people are going to pay my bills. They're the ones that are going to pay my salary. So they have to be in the equation too. So that's when we had to kind of question the whole game again. And then we had to redevelop the whole menu. And we've been following the same strategy ever since, people, AlMakan equals a dish, and equals what you want to create. So that's the same philosophy that we've been following.
I love that you put people first in that equation, like understanding that the customer is what you're doing this for. I mean, you want people to experience your concoctions and your intellect on the plate, So that's phenomenal that it's something that you had to learn the hard way, but it's a lesson that you'll never forget, right?
Definitely. I mean, it's at the end of the day, we realized that back in 2014, when we first opened, I had to understand that this was the society I was dealing with, the people that don't know what duck is, the people that have never tasted kimchi, or the people that have never experienced ramen, they are my people, and how can I make my people eat my food? So it was a very kind of complex situation where we had to kind of break down and like, okay, fine, fair enough, and which was super interesting. I always say this, I try not to say it on interviews, but most of the dishes that we create had a lot of nostalgic planning or had a lot of history to my personal experiences. So when we first opened AlMakan, we didn't have any fries, and people loved messy fries, the fries with the sauce, with the jalapenos and things like that. So when I developed the menu again, we had to add that fry. So we called it jackpot fries. Okay, and it comes in a bag, it is a twisted bag, and it comes to the table in a twisted bag, and you open the bag and you just consume the fries. Now, the whole purpose of the fries, it was me as, being 24, me being, the rebellious mastermind behind the menu. It was a comeback for the Kuwaiti kind of mentality. It was like, it was a dumpster. I used to call it the dumpster mentality, So that bag resembled a trash bag. I was like, you know what? You want fries? I'll give you fries. You want sauce? I'll give you sauce. You want bacon? I'll give you bacon. No problem. I'll give it to you in a trash bag, and only my close friends know the story, and it's very funny to see where it reached today, because today it is our number one seller. Every single table orders jackpot fries, and you see it in the white bag.
People are taking photos of the bag and they're like, look at this bag. It's cool.
look at this bag.
All right. Okay. Well, let's talk about that culture, right? I mean, so Kuwait has the goal of being the food capital of the world by 2030. I mean, that's a huge feat, right? But how can Kuwait attract international foodies when you don't have a single Michelin star, you don't have critics, you don't have really a group of people that really understand what is going on from a culinary perspective? How is that a goal, a reality?
Look, I think there's a misconception on the food capital of the world. Now, the concept was created by my friend, Chef Faisal Al. He's the owner of Chocolate Nest. And they made a very big fuss on the whole campaign about the food capital. They interviewed a lot of chefs. They interviewed a lot of big personalities in the food industry to talk about the food culture or food capital. Now, the misconception is that what you're exactly saying. However, what the reality is, what they meant by the food capital of the world is that, and which is a great initiative, by the way, it was technically Rakan proposing an idea for, let's say, the government, for the private sector, for the public sector, for individuals, for everybody, technically, stating that, which is this: we are no longer going to survive on oil. We don't have any other means of income. So why don't we make Kuwait a food capital? Why don't we make our sole country income from food? And when he says that, he states that food, because we've seen a rise in the F&B industry, and that was basically the rise of carriage, talabat, delivery didn't come into the market yet. So it was the prime days of the F&B, which is in 2016. So that was his concept, was why don't we, the government, why don't you fund the F&B industry, into making it a much more solid sector that you could live off from instead of just living off of oil. Because today, as you see, on weekends, most of the GCC people travel to Kuwait and they literally go on a food frenzy. They would go on a restaurant frenzy. They would come into lists and go to, on a daily basis, they would visit 5 to 6 to 7 restaurants on a daily basis just to eat. It's amazing. I've seen it in most of my restaurants, Emiratis, Qataris, Bahrainis, Saudis. It's crazy. Okay, imagine just 500 people just came in on a weekend, from these people. This is extra cash and income that's just dropped into this country. So if you multiply that by a much bigger number, and making Kuwait a food tourism place and a food capital where you're going to have more restaurants, more food servicing companies, more schools, it's just the pinnacle of a start to a food capital where you're going to have a lot of businesses just servicing restaurants, or servicing food in general.
So another thing that you can think about with this challenge of the 2030, food capital is that, you would try to attract people not only from the GCC. So we're talking about Europeans, Americans, Canadians, people that enjoy to pair their meals with alcohol. So how can Kuwait attract these international foodies with alcohol being off the menu?
I mean, look, we always hear this question, or we always hear this saying by any expat that lives in Kuwait, always the same thing. They always say the same thing, which is the food here is not like anywhere else. It's always the same thing. They always talk about the quality of food. And when I say food, I'm not really talking about the standard. I'm talking about quality. Okay. The quality of food that we get here is unmatchable because most of the food that we do bring in is of the highest quality. We bring in the best meat. We bring in the best chicken. We bring in the best vegetables because restaurants only use vegetables from Holland, for example, or from the States. We only use beef from the States or from Australia or from New Zealand. We only use lamb from New Zealand or from Arabic countries, South Africa, So generally speaking, the supply that comes into this country is of high quality. So, which is amazing. So if you get this high quality, with the right mindset, you would see the outcome being something much better than what is being served today. You don't really need alcohol to be part of an experience because there's always different aspects to it, whether it's dining, whether it's the factories that are being created to supply restaurants. Who would assume that there are cheese farms that produce burrata cheese and mozzarella cheese and Parmesan cheese in Kuwait? People would not believe that. Amazingly, last year, because of Corona, we had a big supply issue with Italy. So for a very long time, I had to switch my Napolitana pizzas with fresh buffalo mozzarella from Kuwait, which is unbelievable, amazingly. So that's just one fraction of what Kuwait could be, because there's a million other things. You've got the agriculture, I've got friends that are growing mangoes in Kuwait. There are people that are growing saffron in Kuwait. So I won't be amazed like years later, people will grow truffles, black truffles over here,
That is huge. And that's amazing. And now that you bring up farms, I know there's a huge passion among a minority of consumers for locally produced farm-to-table restaurants. So, locally sourced foods are usually more expensive, and that means that the customers sometimes won't be able to afford the higher price. So what's your strategy running your 7 restaurants for balancing the selection of locally produced and internationally supplied products?
Look, in Kuwait, it's a bit like, let's say it's the other way around. The local produce is much cheaper than international produce because the international, you're going to pay for customs. You're paying for the service of suppliers. You're paying for a certain quality, as I mentioned, you're getting the best basil, for example. You're getting the best beef. You're getting the best potatoes, from Idaho states, So you're always paying a premium. Whereas in Kuwait, if you're taking local, it's always going to be the cheaper. However, that's not always in a bad scenario because sometimes the local is always better. Sometimes there's no point for me to ship in tomatoes from Italy if San Marzanos can be grown in Kuwait. And that was the case with San. San Restorante is based off a San Marzano tomato. So we used to ship it from Italy, from Naples. And Ali called me one day. He's like, yo, I have San Marzano growing in Al Wafra. I'm like, khalas, that's even better, So we started getting San Marzanos from Kuwait, And sometimes it's just a matter of finding the right standard and quality. I always support locals. I would always love to get my stuff local. However, what's happening is, and most of the time people don't really see this, is that, growing stuff, it always comes by seasons. Okay. Stuff grows in a certain season, stuff dies in a certain season. If there is not enough demand, if I'm the only restaurant requesting stuff to be grown for me specifically, I'm only going to get it a couple of months a year. And that's what happened with the San Marzanos. I only got it maybe 2 months a year. And the rest of the 10 months, I had to ship it from abroad, even though I love the local tomatoes. It just didn't work. They're not growing. But if there was a much bigger demand, that's when they could grow their greenhouse. That's when they can make sure that, they could grow it all year round to make sure that the stock is always available. So that's usually how this works.
All right. Okay. So being that your early introduction to the food world was through BBC food programming, which 4 TV chefs would you put on your Mount Rushmore of culinary giants?
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of chefs. And, in London, there's always BBC Food. In the States, there's always Food Network. In Kuwait, there is Fatafit. Everywhere, there's always a couple of chefs. The top chefs that always, I believe, paved an important role in my current career or my learning aspect was, first of all, in London, Michel Roux Jr. He's a British chef, French origin, and super, let's say, minimal, very upscale food. He's also big on BBC Food. I think he had his own program. Gordon Ramsay, for sure, Gordon Ramsay, because I fell in love with Gordon Ramsay, not on TV, but on YouTube. Because on TV, you always get that, that kind of attitude. But on YouTube, it's a completely different experience because he has his own program. And you would actually see Gordon Ramsay being himself, being around his family. And Nigella Lawson was definitely one of the top people that I still love till date, because she shows you the aspect of creative thinking, but at the same time, home cooking. The way that they merged the film aspect, the film direction to cooking was the reason why I have Zuba's Kitchen today. It is literally how I wanted people to see my food.
Okay, so you mentioned getting a lot of inspiration from BBC Food and the Food Network, etc. But which book, fiction or nonfiction, inspired you to a call to action on a personal or career level?
Look, asking a chef about books is always going to be for cookbooks.
Awesome. I like that answer. I like it. Yeah.
Cookbooks. Always and forever, it's going to be cookbooks. Look, David Chang was one of the first books that I actually read from cover to cover. Cookbooks, for your reference, most of the chefs never read cookbooks. It's always skimming through them. You might read the recipe itself. You might read the intro. You might read some snippets here and there. But reading a cookbook from start to finish is very kind of rare. I read David Chang's Momofuku book from cover to cover. I read Ivan Raman's cookbook from cover to cover. David Chang definitely is an inspiration even before I read the book. And I love his personality because he is a person that is extremely playful. And he is a person to me that changed the whole food industry in the States because he brought to table the understanding of playful food and not being ashamed of, let's say, normalizing stuff. Like he recently introduced his microwave cookware. Just like cooking out of microwaves, he's a 2 Michelin star chef, cooking out of microwaves. So I love that persona of David Chang and I really admire his thinking process. And I really think I have a very close relationship to him as an idol,
Beautiful. Beautiful. You've shared so many important messages, but what's one important message that you want our audience to walk away and take away from our discussion?
Okay, look, the last message I would give is definitely, it might sound cliched, but never give up. It's super cliched, I know, and every person might say the same thing, but really do not give up because I've been in a position where I could easily produce and cook things that everybody has been doing. I can be like every other chef. I can open another burger restaurant, which is just going to be like everything else. But the main reason why I did this is because I want to change the persona and I want to change the culinary identity of Kuwait. I want to be the reason to make it easier for chefs to come in and develop restaurants. And I believe, personally, I think we did, whether people believe it or not, or whether people want to take it into account or not. But I do believe that we came in at 2014, we had to normalize wearing a white jacket, and walking into my kitchen and leading my staff and being there every single day and walking up to my customers and talking to them personally and taking their orders and understanding what they liked, what they disliked. People respected that. And today, people seeing me in my jacket, in my restaurants, till date, come to me and appreciate. To me, this is success. To me, I don't really care about the money. Success has never been about that, because if it was about money, I would have opened up like another business, or I would opened up other restaurants from the start and not bother going through all this headache. And me being here today is because of that, is because of the time, the effort, the blood, the sweat, the tears we went across over the past 7 years was for us to reach this. To me, this is the first level. It's not even the last. It's the first level. And I believe we have much more to implement to benefit this country even to much higher levels.
I love you saying that. I love you saying that this is only the first level, because it's clear to see that from all your restaurants and projects that you're ever evolving, right? So what is next for the prolific Faisal Al Nashmi? If this is level 1, what's level 2 going to be like?
Look, I think over the restaurants that we've opened, it's always been a growth in standard. There's always been a growth in operation. There's always been a growth in experience. San is the recent one that we opened. And to me, San today is the most successful restaurant out of our group. And today it is considered one of the top successful restaurants in Kuwait today, till date. San is almost more than a year old. This happened because of what we learned over the past years. We learned, and by the way, San was the easiest restaurant that we operated. We developed the restaurant in 3 months. And today it is the most successful restaurant. I believe because we learned a lot of mistakes. We learned a lot of things over the past years that we implemented and made this job much easier. With a much tougher restaurant. Today, if you compare San to AlMakan, San is a much tougher restaurant. But again, it's making better numbers. It's considered a much higher restaurant as a standard. So I think the next step for us is we're always hungry for new concepts. For me, whether it's the next one or the third, fourth, fifth, or sixth ones that do come by now, it's always going to be elevating the concepts even further for me to reach the ideals, which is a fine dining. Hopefully, however long it might take, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, God knows. But to reach that level, to me, we have achieved a great goal. We have achieved a great, aim that I used to have. And I wish that does happen.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Man, thank you so much for joining the dialogue. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. You've been phenomenal. I really appreciate you spending your weekend with us. And we can't wait until we get to connect and collaborate next.
Inshallah, definitely. Thank you, Aziz. Thank you so much for having me. And it's actually my first podcast, and I'm super, super, super excited to be here. I'm really happy. Amazing questions again. I talked about a lot of things today that I haven't even considered talking with many other people, like trash bag mentality. So it's very fun to be here. So thank you, Aziz. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you, man. Thank you so much. This podcast would not be possible without your support. So please subscribe to our podcast, share it with your friends and family, check out the show notes for any references made, and engage with us on Instagram and email. Thank you.